Dune Part 2 has hit the box office this weekend to great critical acclaim, to massive ticket sales. It's been described as possibly the best science fiction movie of the last decade or longer. Is it as good as they say? Is the gushing praise that it's receiving worthwhile? Let's find out. Stepping back briefly to 1963-64, Frank Herbert wrote a science fiction book that was published in Analog magazine, first of all, called Dune. And that book then took off as some kind of cult science fiction reference. How many books do you know that has, the top 20 quotes from Dune, the top 50 quotes from Dune, the top 100 quotes from Dune? It is websites dedicated to it, and it is a strong fan following, and I'm one of those fans. I used it to help me get through life growing up as a teenager, because things like the fear litany, it lets you embrace your fear, face your fear, allow the fear to pass, and then after it is gone, only you shall remain. So it's been a great primer for life, and I've had a strong attachment to that book. But making that book into some form of media that can be watched has proven difficult. Many people have tried. There was a film in the 70s, cancelled it because the costs were just skyrocketing, because Dune is set in an amazingly big, vast sense of space. And while most of it happens on the planet, that's only the start of things. Because Frank Herbert went on to write another 5 books, and then his sons carried on after him. So it's a series that has continued throughout recent times. Previously, the best adaptation that had happened to Frank Herbert's book was probably Dune, the movie, by David Lynch in 1984. It opened to severe criticism from the critics. It didn't do well at the box office, it bombed. Since then, it's become a cult viewing favourite. So the last person to take on Dune has been Denis Villeneuve, a Canadian filmmaker. And he's done some pretty good sci-fi in the past. He's done Arrival. He did Sicario, a well-received movie. And of course, he did Blade Runner 2049, a retake on what was possibly one of the most iconic science fiction movies ever, in my view. So how's he done with Dune? Well, he did part 1. He did part 1 in 2021, and it came out during the pandemic. It made 40 odd million at the box office on its opening weekend, which, although that sounds poor, was actually a great result, because not only was it released during a pandemic, it was released concurrently on HBO. So people could effectively watch it for nothing on their TV. But still, people went to the cinema and paid $41 million in the opening weekend to see that movie. So I think it did pretty well. This movie is now looking like it's set to reap about 80 to 90 million in the opening weekend, which is pretty good for a science fiction movie, because science fiction movies don't generally get the huge numbers. But you know how sometimes an animal gets caught in a trap, and an animal will do anything to get out of that trap? It'll chew its leg off. But a human caught in a trap doesn't do that. A human caught in a trap lays dead, waits for the trapper to come back, attacks and eliminates the trapper, so that none of his family and the other people that are in his tribe would ever be affected again by such a devious man. Now, that is a quote from Dune, or it's a scene from Dune, the book. So that's the kind of thinking that goes into it. But is Denis Villeneuve's movie a trap?
It's a trap!
Now, don't get me wrong, I am a big Dune fan. I love the book, but I'm not going to pick holes in this movie because that certain things are in or are not in. Although there are some things that will be in the spoiler zone at the very end of this, that if you don't wish spoilers, I'll put up a graphic showing you that the spoilers are about. I'll try and make it completely spoiler free up until then. But I hear you ask, what of the movie? Is it worth going to see? Am I going to enjoy it? Well, yeah, you're going to enjoy it because it's brilliant. I mean, Dune Part 1 was a brilliant movie. You looked at it and visually, it's a stunning treat. It's like a travelogue for the planet Arrakis. You just can't go wrong. I mean, it is beautiful, and it's shot beautifully, and the effects are really well done. And this one is no different. It is beautifully done. It has great effects. an astounding visual delight to watch this movie. But, and of course there's always a but, because never do you like everything that's in a movie. It's long, 2 hours and 40 minutes. And remember, this is only taking in half of the story that was encompassed in the whole film that David Lynch shot in 1984. So it picks up where the other film finished, where the Lady Jessica and Timothée Chalamet playing Paul Atreides have just escaped. And then it goes into their journey throughout the planet to evade capture, to see what's going to happen as the story unfolds. And that's some of the slight problems here, in that the pacing of this movie is slow. There are times when literally you could go out of the theatre, you could go to the toilet, you could visit the concession stand, you could buy yourself a hot dog, a cup of coffee or whatever. You could come back in, sit down, and say, what have I missed? And it would be, well, pretty much nothing. Because the story takes a long time to get going. And yet, at some points, it feels rushed. I think a lot has to do with Denis Villeneuve's style, and you can either love that or hate it. I'm kind of in the point that I'd rather see a little more action and get to things quicker. For instance, there's a scene in it where they're going to go and get something. But instead of saying, we know where these things are, and then show us them getting the things from where they were, we know where these things are. We'll have a scene planning how we're going to get them. We'll have a scene talking about how we're going to get them. We'll have a scene looking at where these things are and talking about what we're going to do with these things once we get these things. It goes on and on. It just drags on a little bit. But let's cut to the good things. And the good thing is, it's stunning visually. Visually, it's stunning. It was shot on IMAX. If you want to see it at its best, go and watch it on IMAX. The biggest and baddest IMAX you can find. Otherwise, go to the cinema. Don't wait for it coming out on video, because you're going to be disappointed. If you're watching it on a TV, even if it's a huge TV, you're going to be disappointed. You're going to be disappointed if you see it on a computer screen. So I would encourage you to go and watch it on the biggest and baddest screen you can. Sound-wise, though, and Zimmer was in charge of the audio track, and I was a little disappointed. It didn't have that visceral feel that I would have thought should have picked up with the great visuals, and I was a little disappointed in the sound. I think it didn't quite come across as good as it should have, and it didn't stir me the same way that the sound did in Lynch's 1984 movie. But again, I think we'll go back and we'll have a retrospective and look at the 84 movie and compare it to Villeneuve's Part 1 and Part 2 in the future. If this is the kind of thing that you want me to do, I'm more than happy to do it, because I love talking about Dune. I'm a little disappointed in some of the casting choices, but let's go through the casting. So we've got the lead actor, Timothée Chalamet, who's playing Paul Atreides. Paul Atreides is effectively the son of the murdered Duke from Part 1. And this isn't really a spoiler, because if you haven't seen Part 1, you really need to go back and watch that before you can watch Part 2. So why are you here if you haven't seen Part 1? But anyway, regardless of that, Timothée Chalamet plays Paul, and he's not the Paul that I imagined from the book. He's not the Paul that I imagined from previous movies or even the miniseries. So in Part 1, I thought he was a bit of a soy boy, and I thought, why would someone who's been trained from the word go to take over a planet, to run a planet, why would he be such an ineffectual mama's boy? Maybe that's just me. But anyway, he does develop slightly in this movie, but not as much as a true leader of men should. And remember, this guy's going to go on to lead a holy war, apparently. So how much development is still to come? Because I think we're pretty much guaranteed there's going to be a third. But what of Timothée himself? Well, I'd actually just seen Timothée in Willy Wonka, and he did a great job. I thought he did a really good job as a young Willy Wonka, and that's a completely different subject. You know, with that mop of unruly hair that never seems to change. Ben, my colleague, thinks he's got some kind of clause or contract in every movie he makes that they're not allowed to touch his hair or mess with his appearance. He did an okay job. He doesn't say an awful lot, and when he does say things, sometimes it comes across as quite forced and not really in keeping with the way that I would envisage Paul Atreides would be, but he does okay. The big love interest is Chani, who's a Fremen girl who was training to be a Bene Gesserit, and this is where Dune becomes so complicated that if you don't know the story, it's very difficult to sit and watch this movie or talk about this movie without throwing words at you like Bene Gesserit. So Bene Gesserit is a sisterhood of what they term witches, and they work behind the scenes, much like the WEF does here. They work behind the scenes to manipulate governments to plan blood. Well, I'm not saying that the WEF does that, but I'm just saying they work behind the scenes. And they plan bloodlines, and they take the route of succession. They make sure that the right people are copulating with the right people in order to further the rule of the Landsraad in the universe that Dune exists in. So Chani's a native, and she's initially distrustful of Paul when she first meets him because Paul's an outsider. And she's played by Zendaya, and I don't get the fuss. I really don't get the fuss because, yeah, she looks okay, but she doesn't stack up to what I'd always thought Chani would have been and should have been. And in fact, in this movie, she stomps about a lot. In fact, she reminds me of some kind of Liverpudlian petulant teenager because she kind of has the scouse brows, and all she ever does is glare at people and storm off. And that's kind of sums up her performance. She certainly doesn't upstage Timothée. So I think he's kept her in check there. Maybe that's why she does so much stabbing about and storming off. But anyway, and then we have the Lady Jessica, who was Paul's mother, and she's played by Rebecca Ferguson, and she does a good job. There's no doubt there. It's if anything, I think she doesn't get enough time at the front of the movie because she's meant to be really quite pivotal to the story, and sometimes I think she's kind of pushed into the background. I think maybe she should have been brought forward a little more, but as an actress, she does a great job. Then we have Gurney Halleck, the old Duke's guard that had trained Paul and is effectively his protector and mentor, and he's played by Josh Brolin. And Josh Brolin doesn't say a lot at the best of times, and he says even little in this movie. He does lots of surly looks and brooding. And there's brooding and surly looks between him and Chani because they don't think they like each other, and they certainly don't trust each other. So Josh Brolin plays the surly look. Then we have Stilgar, played by Javier Bardem, and he does a reasonable job of a Stilgar. He's very much he's on Paul's side. He believes in the prophecy, and Paul is a living embodiment of that prophecy coming true. I'm pretty sure in the book he was meant to be Chani's uncle, but I'm not sure I picked up on that in this movie. But maybe I need to rewatch and go through it because it is a long movie, and not a lot of dialogue. There's loads of other things, and we'll go on to that in a minute. But we'll just continue through the cast list, and then we've got the Emperor, who's played by Christopher Walken, and his daughter Florence Pugh, the Princess Heirloom. And not a lot of screen time for them. Christopher Walken's always great in everything he does. Florence Pugh seems fine. She does an okay job, but not a lot of screen time. But I think there's more screen time coming for Florence Pugh in probably the third one, because there has definitely got to be a third one. The way this ends, there has to be a third one. Then moving on, we have the stars of this show, the Harkonnen family. So the Harkonnens formerly ruled Arrakis and were in charge of the spice production before the Atreides had taken over. And the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, played by Stellan Skarsgård, is true to the form. He's a better version of the Baron that we had in the 84 Lynch one. He's maybe not quite as evil as he could be, but it's still a pretty solid performance from Skarsgård. And I particularly like the portrayal of Gidi Prime, which is the planet that they come from, because they look a bit like the engineers from Prometheus. They're all very white and almost complete. Well, they all seem to be hairless completely, which is quite interesting. And then we have the Beast Raban, who is the sun, and he's doing a pretty poor job of maintaining spice production in Arrakis. So he's played by Dave Bautista, and he does a great job. He plays the Beast fantastically, I think. He's not blue in this one. And then we have a newcomer to me, Austin Butler, who plays Feyd-Rautha, who is a psychopath. I mean, the man is meant to be playing a psychopath. He is playing a psychopath, and he plays it very, very well. The Princess Irulan, who again is under the control of the Bene Gesserits, said that, yeah, he's controllable by the use of sex. And that maybe gives you an idea of what goes on in this movie. It's not R-rated by any stretch of the imagination, but the Bene Gesserit are working behind the scenes to manipulate what happens. So Austin Butler plays a really good Feyd-Rautha, and especially when he's facing up to Paul. But the guy does have issues, real issues. Now, other than the lines that they have to deliver, they seem to have been contracted into this kind of acting method that involves looking. I've never seen so much looking in a movie. You know, Paul looks at the desert, he gazes wistfully into the distance, he looks at the sand running through his fingers, he looks at Gurney, he looks at Shani, he looks at Stilgar, they all look back at him. Everybody's always looking at each other and not saying anything. It's just, it's the most bizarre directing choice I've ever seen. There's just so much looking, it's like, a look, I give you another look. Oh, you look to me, I'll look at you. They just keep looking at each other. And then the sand, they're looking at the sand. They're touching the sand, they're smacking the sand. It's just like, there's so much sand and so much looking. It's just like, what are we doing here? Would you get on with the movie? Could we move to the next part? I mean, there's a huge battle in this movie, and if you blink, you'd miss it because it's over in the blink of an eye. But the looking keeps going on. They're just looking all the time. So I hate to go back to it, but if you haven't read the book and you don't know what's going on, all this looking doesn't help. It doesn't give you anything. And it's been said that Denis Villeneuve would like to make a movie where there's no dialogue. Well, he's getting quite close on occasions on this one. I'm not a great fan of the incredible amount of looking that goes on in this movie. So, is it a great movie? Well, it's a good movie. I think it's a really good movie. I would probably give it a good solid 7 out of 10. If you're a Dune fan, you'll love the visuals, but you'll be picking holes in the rest of the story because there are some differences, and we'll come on to them in the spoiler zone, which is just coming. Musically, again, I think it lacks something. It just lacks something in the music department. Special effects are great, CGI is good. Very difficult to tell the difference between practicals and CGI. I thought it was very, very well done. But an awful lot of landscape shots, of people wandering into the distance, of people crossing the desert, of people turning around and stomping off. Yes, Zendaya, I'm looking at you. With her grumpy foot stamp and then storm off. She does that in quite a number of scenes. Maybe this was just a representation of what she's actually like. I don't know. I'm only kidding. So yeah, it's a good movie and it's worth seeing in the cinema. Definitely worth seeing. It's a visual treat. If you don't know the book, you'll struggle. I think you'll struggle to fully understand what's going on in Dune, because Dune isn't just about this planet and what's happening with spice. The whole thing is a build-up to a complete universe of what's going to change the way that everybody and everything in that universe works together. So this is only the start. And as they say in Dune, a beginning is a delicate thing. Now, spoiler zone, people. There's a massive massive change between this movie and the book, in that when Paul becomes a Kwisatz Haderach after taking the water of life, and if you're a Dune fan, you'll know. If you're not a Dune fan, you shouldn't be here, because I'm telling you things that's happening in the movie. Paul becomes a Kwisatz Haderach, and Alia's not even born at this point. So the Baron isn't killed by Alia. I don't know where he's going to go now, because this is a major deviation from the Dune story, because Alia goes through her life questioning her actions over killing the Baron Harkonnen. It's a pivotal part of her character development. So where is it going to go? Because she's still in the womb at this point in this movie. So big change there. Villeneuve's going to resolve that one. Well, he will. There will be a third, because I believe that the trailer has been released teasing the third one, which will be coming in 2026. So I'm not going to bore you with a long list of spoilers, because that's basically it. If you've liked this, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Everything you do really helps us to bring you more content, and we love to bring you content. If you've got the means, feel free to drop a donation. Goodbye.